Welcome to episode 5 of the CALT Brief podcast. My name is Kitt and I'm the staff attorney at CALT. Today, I want to talk about a few different things. I want to start off by talking about a few different Court of Appeals cases that came out recently in Iowa, and then I also have an interview with Ryan Drollette on prevented planting. I know the weather has been nice lately, but we all remember the spring flooding that has really been affecting farmers and farm production still, so we'll get to that interview at the end. I know I usually talk about the ag law side of things, but I did want to mention that 199A regulations for cooperatives were released today on June 18th. Christine's going to have a write-up on the website probably by the time this podcast is posted. We'll be covering the regulations on the next tax podcast and also at our summer seminar, which is out on July 18th and 19th here in Ames. And speaking of our summer seminar, don't forget to sign up. Registration is open and you can sign up by going to the CALT website. So to start off, the Iowa Court of Appeals issued a ruling on a case about prescriptive easements in the beginning of June. In that case, there were two landowners who shared a man-made pond over their property line on the partition line. The landowners argued over who had access to the dock and then to the shoreline. The court found that a prescriptive easement existed because they had been using it for such a long time, but that there was no boundary by acquiescence or adverse possession claim. So that case is Franklin versus Johnston. And then in another Court of Appeals case, a farmer created an LLC for his farmland. He was the only member of the LLC, but he did make his one son who farmed with him the manager of the LLC. In the farmer's will, he left everything in equal shares to his 3 children. There was the one on-farm son and then his 2 off-farm children. After the farmer died, his son continued to manage the farm and then split the profits between the other 2 siblings that were off the farm. At some point, the 2 off-farm siblings wanted to either partition the land or change the LLC to become a member-managed LLC instead of a manager-managed LLC. The on-farm son would not agree to either of these options, so the siblings then filed this lawsuit claiming that the LLC had dissolved because it did not have a member within 90 days of their father's death. The district court in that case found that the son had acted like a member, so that was okay, he was one, but the Court of Appeals found that the operating agreement in this case required a joinder agreement to be executed in order to add a new member. While it seems pretty obvious the farmer wanted the on-farm son to continue farming, the court found that because the operating agreement required the joinder agreement, the LLC dissolved under the law because it had no members, and you need a member to continue an LLC. I think this case is a really great reminder for lawyers that if you don't have a ton of expertise in an area, to get someone to help you out with it, another more experienced attorney, because in this case the court did say that the lawyer who made the LLC did not have a lot of experience making LLCs, and this problem probably could have been avoided, that the LLC could have kept going. So this definitely is a reminder to check all your boxes when you're helping out someone. So those cases are up online if you want to read more about them, and there's also links to the actual cases so you guys can take a look at that. Another issue that's coming up this spring is prevented planting, the program. I have an interview with a farm management specialist who's going to help answer some questions about prevented planting. Today I have with me Ryan Drollette. Ryan is a farm management specialist for Iowa State Extension for Region 7. Ryan has a Bachelor of Science from Utah State University in Dairy Science and a Master's in Applied Economics. I asked Ryan to be here to talk a little bit about prevented planting and how the program is impacting producers. Ryan, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Kitt.
Yeah. To get started, can you just give us an overview on prevented planting and why has it gotten so much attention this year?
It's gotten a lot of attention this year because of the wet weather that we've had, not only in Iowa, but across the nation. As you look at the drought monitor that's hosted on the University of Nebraska-Lincoln website, which is the national drought monitor, you can actually see that it's one of the years where we've had very few spots across the nation for drought because of the wet weather and the abundance of moisture we've had across the nation. And as you look at the crop progress report that the USDA puts out, it's not just an Iowa issue, it's a nation issue. Looking earlier this year in the weeks prior to right now, we've had great weather and dry weather the last several weeks, which has been great. But prior to the 1st of June, and I know even sitting here, so I'm in Iowa City in Johnson County, Iowa, on the eastern side of the state, east central part. It's been one of the wettest months. May was one of the wettest months that they've had on record. I was trying to remember the data, but it's one of the wettest. I'm not going to say wettest because I don't have the data in front of me, but it has been one of the wettest to date since they've been keeping track of records. And because of that, farmers have not been able to get in the field. They haven't been able to get planted in a timely manner. That being said, the later we get on planting, that impacts the yield of whatever we're planting, corn and soybeans, as we look at Iowa. When we look at provisions, especially crop insurance provisions and regulations on crop insurance, let's see, I'm pulling the numbers up right now. When we think about the state of Iowa, the example is in 2018, 96% of well, let's see, I'm going to go back here to a different number. We've got 12.2 million acres of corn were insured in 2018, and 9.3 million acres of soybeans were insured, and that's according to the USDA's risk management agency that is in charge of the crop insurance, or federal crop insurance policies across the nation. I mean, that's a lot of corn and bean acres that are insured, and according to those policies on corn, it's like, okay, research shows we need to be in and planted by the 1st of June, or we start losing yield, and crop insurance policies go, yeah, we're not going to continue to insure you a full coverage level if you're not getting planted in a timely manner. But there's also reasons that we might not get planted, and that's what some of these policies cover. One of those policies is the prevented planting policy within crop insurance.
Several prevented planting dates have already passed. Are there any other important dates that are upcoming that producers should have in mind as we go through the summer?
So let's see, today is the 18th of June, and so we've got a few different dates depending on if we're in corn or beans. And we're just going to stick to corn and beans just because that's what we've got in Iowa. Mm-hmm. There's other provisions in other states and other dates for other states and for other crops. But for Iowa, when we hit the 1st of June, so the 31st of May is my last day to plant corn, and then I enter what we call the late planting period. It begins June 1st and goes through the 25th of June. Within that period on corn, I can choose at any point to say, you know what, I'm done. It doesn't make economical sense to be able to still plant and get a decent crop. And so you can take prevented planting you can declare prevented planting at any point between June 1st and June 25th. Or you can also plant, but when you plant in that period, your coverage level is reduced from what you currently have. The dates on soybeans for Iowa, we enter the late planting period on June 16th. So the last date is June 15th. So we passed that date as well. And so now we're currently also in the late planting period for soybeans, which is June 16th through July 10th.
To qualify for the prevented planting payments, do producers need to be in a declared disaster area, or can anyone qualify for these payments?
To receive a payment for prevented planting, you need to have federal crop insurance, and your policy has to have that as part of your policy. When we look at the different types of policies, there's revenue protection, there's yield protection, there's area revenue protection, there's the harvest price exclusion. Most of the corn and soybeans in Iowa According to the Risk Management Agency, again, 97% of corn in 2018 was under revenue protection, and 96% of the beans that were insured were under revenue protection. And yield protection also. Yield protection, revenue protection are the two policies that I am 100% sure have a prevented planting or delayed planting or late planting policy. You don't need to be in a disaster area. You don't need to be in areas that are flooded. What the requirement is that you had federal crop insurance.
Are there any concerns for getting a cover crop in? Practically, can farmers get a cover crop in, and do they need to harvest it, or can they not do that?
So on cover crops, if we go ahead and we take prevented planting, the prevented planting provision, and we exercise that in our crop insurance, and we're not going to plant a covered commodity corn or soybeans, part of the provisions is that we also don't have a second crop, let's say, or a crop that we're going to profit off of, because we've just been paid out for, under our insurance policy, the crop that wasn't planted. So planting, I'm not an agronomist, but sitting through meetings with the agronomists, it is wise to plant a cover crop if we're going to take prevented planting, and for erosion control, for many different things, to keep the organisms in the soil continuing on and to not have those depleted as well. A lot for water quality and erosion control. There are provisions on the cover crops. What type of crop is considered a cover crop and seeding rates. I know sitting through the webinar that we did here back in May, before we hit the last deadline in May for corn, and this is where you visit with your crop insurance agent, visit with one of the agronomists with the extension as far as a cover crop is concerned about what you can plant and at what seeding rates, because I know that we can plant corn as a cover crop, but it just has to be seeded at a high rate to be able to not have it produce ears of corn. You can use soybeans as a cover crop, oats, cereal, rye. There's many different things, but it's a matter of water quality, soil erosion. There's many different benefits to putting in a cover crop. So the advice is you can leave your ground fallow, but some of the recommendations is to go ahead and put in a cover crop for more.
Not only is there good soil reasons to be putting in cover crops, but it won't affect your prevented planting payments then, it sounds like?
It won't, but there are a few dates that we have to think about on cover crops. So if we go ahead and we plant a cover crop is not required, but to receive your indemnity payment for the prevented planting and planting a cover crop, you cannot harvest the cover crop. The provision says no harvesting of the cover crop. You can hay or graze it after November 1st. Okay, so if I've planted a cereal, rye, or oats, or something that I want to hay or graze, that's okay, but I have to wait until after November 1st to do that. It says no harvesting at all. So if I planted a cereal, rye, or oats, I can't go in and harvest it with a combine for the grain, but I can hay or graze it, and that has to be done after November 1. Or I can just leave it and use it as crop mass cover to help with erosion.
So then, are there any practical considerations producers should be considering as we hit mid-June, or tools they can be using as they try to make the best decision for their operation?
One of the tools we have is on the Ag Decision Maker website. So the Ag Decision Maker website is an Iowa State University Extension and Outreach website that the Econ and Farm Management Group have, that we put decision tools that go through the economics and finances of different things. And so as we think about delayed planting and prevented planting, there is an Excel spreadsheet that has been developed that is on the Ag Decision Maker website. The number for it is A1-57, and sometimes it's just as easy to, in the search bar on the web page, type in delayed planting or prevented planting or the A1-57. So that spreadsheet we'll go through, and an individual producer can go in and put what they expect harvest cash prices to be, or the expected futures price to be, as well as their bushels, what they expect their yield to be, or a typical yield, and what part of the state they're in, and then what the date of planting that they're looking at. And the research from Iowa State is actually built into the spreadsheet to show what part of the state I'm in and what kind of yield drag that I'm going to have because of planting at different times after the 1st of June, either for corn or for soybeans. And then it will go through, and you can even put in other things you can put in as seed costs, fertilizer, herbicides, labor, harvest costs, because it will analyze whether or not it'll give you an idea of the economic return that you can expect if by planting and getting the yield that it shows, or taking the prevented plant provision, or switching to, if I'm in corn, switching to beans, or even replanting if I've got situations where I need to replant. And then you can pull up a chart and it'll show you the different lines. And those lines change based on the assumption of the price of the corn or beans, based on your coverage level of crop insurance. And it's a great tool that individuals can look at, and I think they need to look at on an individual basis. We can do analysis for the state, but it really, when we think about crop insurance, it's down to the individual farm, and you want to make sure that your individual decision is the one that's right for your farm versus one that we do an analysis on a wide area basis, because every farm is going to be different. But great tools on ag decision maker, especially on prevented planting and delayed planting and replanting.
Another option would probably be talking to their crop insurance agent.
Yes, it's always best that if you've got issues with prevented planting or delayed planting, or issues with yield that you need to replant, the first thing you should do is contact your crop insurance agent, because then they're going to help you go through the rules that you need to follow, not necessarily with whether or not you should or shouldn't replant. I know in visiting with some of the individuals around the state, and the ones that I deal with, some are just getting done planting with the great weather that we've had. Some went ahead and took prevented plant, and we've got some individuals that sat there and looked at the economics on the dollar side and went, you know what, I've got livestock, I need to feed them, I need to feed more than I care about the economic return. And so then they were looking at still planting, even though with the yield drag, just because they needed the feed for livestock. And so it gets back to every decision is back down to the individual farm and producer, but you should be in contact with your crop insurance agent or adjuster, and making sure that you're following the guidelines and rules that are in place to make sure that you're doing it appropriately.
Yeah, it seems like it really comes down to such a individual, level, that what's best for your one farm might not be best for another farm operation. So I think that's great advice on using those resources.
And the tools are there to help you make a decision for your individual farm. And even at that, it's still a tool, and you need to use your best judgment. It's only as
right.
good as the information we put in, and sometimes with the information we've got, it changes daily, especially when we look at commodity prices right now.
Oh, right. Well, not only have producers been impacted by all these natural disasters and commodity prices, but the impact of trade wars have been hitting producers pretty hard right now. Do we know enough about the next round of MFP payments to see how they're going to be impacting the disaster relief programs?
Oh, we don't. Not at the moment. We don't know a lot of information. We know that the information we do know is that there will be a payment made, and we know that it will. When they came out with the announcement, I'll just say it was awful timing on it, because you're in the middle of this prevented planting period or delayed planting on corn, and people are sitting there making speculation decisions, but the only information we have is that we will have a payment and how much the total payout they expect it to be, and they listed all covered commodities because they didn't want it to impact individuals' decisions on what they were going to plant. For example, they didn't want to say, oh, we're going to do a payment on soybeans, and therefore everybody goes and plants a bunch of soybeans when
right.
That's not what they should do. They didn't want to impact the market
right.
that way. But needless to say, it has impacted the market. I will say some people have made decisions based on the fact that there may or may not be a payment on different commodities. But I'd say at this moment, make your decisions on planning and prevented planting based on not on an issue of whether or not there's going to be a government subsidy payment on commodities.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. There's just a lot to take into consideration now, and some things to probably leave out when you're making these decisions.
Yeah, and some people might disagree and say, you need to have all the information to make a wise decision. And I would say on this next round of government subsidy for the tariff issues, I would say that this is one where you kind of have to have it needs to stand on its own on a different decision and not on your decision on what you're planning. You should plan on what's economically viable before that even comes into play.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Ryan, for answering all these questions today. It was great having you here. I think we covered a lot of ground. So I think that all this will come in really handy. So thank you so much.
No, thank you, and you're welcome.